10th, 2020. First item is our agenda. Any changes to it? All right, then that's our agenda. Next item is the chair's report, and don't have anything to report. So we're on to the director's report. David, have you got anything?
Nothing new to report per se. Same posture we've been in for quite some time, and with more recent uptick in COVID cases, that tends to draw more our attention more and more away. But we had a banner night in front of the city council last night where I think we had 6 zoning amendments that were all approved. This was the parkland at Cambrian Rise, the tents, the Birchwood Nursing Home, the daycare, and the front yard parking. Did I miss one, Megan? Did I get them all? So those were all unanimously approved by the council last night.
Good. Okay, thank you. Next item is item 4, our public forum. Opportunity for anyone, member of the public, to speak to us on an item they'd like to. I know Sharon was wanting to speak. Anyone else that you know of, Megan?
I did get an email from Barbara Hedrick, but I don't see her here. So I also told her that I would just make sure that you were all aware of the fact that she had shared communications with you. Some of them I sent to you with the agenda over the weekend when I forwarded it, but she sent some more yesterday. And so I told her I would make sure that you saw those.
Okay, thank you.
So the only person I see here right now is Sharon.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Do you want me to speak?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hi. Good evening. I'm Sharon Busher, and I live on East Avenue, and I'm surrounded by the University of Vermont and the Medical Center. So what they do with their parking and their development is key to where I live and the neighborhoods that are part of the neighborhood I belong to. So I wanted to speak about, obviously, your agenda item, which is the 5-year parking plan from the university, from CATMA. And first of all, I want to say that I've always thought that this 5-year plan, the concept, was excellent. I think it's really good to project where you are today and what you anticipate or what you know at this point about future development and future demands for parking. And I think that it's so important that since UVM, I consider them a neighbor, since we are in this together, I think it's really important that we are all aware of what each other are doing and the stresses that we both experience from either the lack of parking or the change in the concept of moving away from driving and trying to accommodate other modes of transportation. But this deals with parking. I wanted to just say that although I like the idea of the 5-year plan and I want to support that going forward, it's been happening now for quite a while, I am hesitant to really use this as the basis for the parking needs for future development as it comes forward before the DRB, and to lean on this or look to this as opposed to looking at each proposal and the parking requirements that are needed. I don't think that we can anticipate very accurately what those needs would be. And I think we fall down on this and sometimes are short-sighted or don't see it clearly enough and come up. We all lose when we're wrong with this. So I like the idea. I want you to weigh in on this. I want the plan to move forward. And I'm going to speak to a couple of things that I think are problematic for me or I don't feel are I don't see them clearly identified, but I'm still not wanting it to be the plan that you look to and the university not really having to really do an in-depth parking plan for development in the next 5 years. I just think that that hasn't worked that well. So one of the things I did want to say as far as Barbara Hedrick, you know, I've been in person going to the Planning Commission, and Barbara has been, I think, an incredible resource for us, very thorough in her analysis, whether you agree with it or not. It's very thorough, and I think she points out some things that we need to pay attention to. So I want to thank her for her detail, and I read her communication, and there are some pieces of that communication that I share, some concerns I share. One has to do with how UVM addresses their parking needs, and where UVM, as I understand it, sometimes considers the parking that surrounds a development or their property, and considers some of the parking that is on street that is used to fulfill their parking needs. And I'm not clear what percentage that is, and if the majority is really on site and a very small amount is on street. But cautionary for all of us is that the city's systematic removal of on-street parking is really something that people have to pay attention to. So if this is part of the equation, then I think people have to look at that and not count that, because it's not guaranteed. And in my ward, in Ward 1, we've been burned by that. Property owners have thought that that was there, investment property owners have thought that that was there, and it wasn't there because it was removed. So I just wanted to talk about that. I didn't see a lot of conversation in this about satellite parking, and yet the medical center, long ago, Chapin Spencer was a city councilor with me, and he really did demand side parking and really emphasize the need for satellite parking and the system that the hospital has in place. And I didn't see that as robust in UVM's plan. I know they have satellite parking on Pine Street, but I guess they lease some of that out. And I'm just not sure if they take full advantage of that. Let me just look at something else. And then Barbara mentioned this, and then I went into the plan, and I must admit, I think that I see this as something that isn't clear either. In their charts, they talk about head counts, and they include the students in Redstone lofts and apartments. But then when you look at what is included in their parking plan, I don't see that category listed. I see the other categories, but I don't see that category listed. And I wasn't quite sure whether it's included in one of the other categories or whether there's an omission. I really couldn't figure that out. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Let me just look at this. The other thing that I have firsthand experience is I go to a number of Lane Series events, and a lot of them are at the music department at Southwick, and there's never adequate parking there. And so especially if there are simultaneous events going on, it is a nightmare, and people are parking illegally all over the place, and it's just dangerous. So I don't know how they're addressing event parking, especially when there's simultaneous events going on. I just don't see how that's addressed in their plan. And the last thing I wanted to say, and thank you for listening to me, is the visitor lot. Once again, I've had an opportunity to use the visitor lot or try to, and there's never a space, even though it's metered, for me, a visitor. It's always full. So if you have, that's at the top of College. If you have a visitor lot and people are coming a distance, whereas I could, usually when I used it, I was coming from someplace else and didn't want to go home and then walk back. But I could walk there most of the time to Joe Spidell's office or whatever. But if you're coming from a distance and you're dependent on a visitor lot, it's really hard to find visitor parking at UVM. It's not well mapped out, and it sets you up to fail. And I've known a number of people who've actually got tickets because they thought they were parking in a visitor space and weren't. So I know it's not just at the top of College Street, but there's some, where is it, by Davis, and it isn't very adequate. And so I think that because we do have a lot of visitors, I really would like them to explain how they've looked at their needs and how they've better addressed them. So the last thing, I'm sorry, Andy, I lied. The last thing is that when you have a parking plan, you also need to master plan. You also need to know the proposed development in the next 5 years. And if that's there, I didn't really see all of that, and I'm not sure how much of that is solidified. And that's why I started off the conversation saying that I like the concept, but I think as each project moves forward, the parking should be addressed individually with each plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Megan, do we have anybody else now?
Yes, Barbara Hedrick has joined. I am going to unmute Barbara and
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks for joining us, Barbara.
Oh, thank you
ahead.
very much, everybody, for your work. And thank you very much for reading the comments I provided. If anybody hasn't read them, they're online now. I'm just going to be very brief, or try to be. I'm concerned that UVM has a parking deficit during the daytime and also in the evening when it hosts sold-out basketball games and larger events. And so I'd really like to see the Joint Institutional Parking Management Plan start to provide a parking supply and demand analysis for different size events that UVM is planning on hosting on the athletic center after the construction and renovation work of the PFG building is done. For example, in addition to UVM basketball and hockey events, which are 3,000 and 4,000 person events when those are sold out, UVM's forecast for the renovated, expanded PFG complex includes the following kinds of events. They're going to be large events, they're going to be frequent. So I'm just going to give you a short list. 6 large concerts with 5,000 attendees each. 6 more concerts with 2,500 attendees each. 4 regional tournaments with 5,000 visitors per event. 5 high school graduations with 3,000 visitors per event. 4 conventions, trade shows with 3,200 visitors per event. 4 consumer shows with 2,800 visitors per event. 8 banquets with 1,500 visitors per event, and 8 other events with average attendance of 3,000 persons per event. So you can see the use of the PFG building is going to change a lot. And that means we really need a supply and demand analysis built around that, the new uses of that building, because it's going to create parking deficits, not only in the evenings, but also on weekends and during the summer. We really need to understand the ins and outs of how that venue is going to affect UVM's on-campus parking supply so that that parking doesn't flow over to streets. And I know that the Planning Commission and the DRB don't have any say about on-street parking, but this is our one chance to make sure that when the Public Works Commission is looking at whether or not street parking should be monetized and sold for the public to use. And I don't want that to happen on streets near UVM because it'll just be pure hell for people who live next to UVM to have our streets filled by UVM cars. I really feel that we need to use this opportunity of the Joint Institutional Parking Management Plan to say, you know, like Sharon said, look at parking needs on a project by project basis because these 5-year plans are not accurate. I'm just going to close there and hope that you read my documents if you haven't already, but I do have 4 questions for UVM. One is, first question, when UVM first announced the PFG renovation expansion project, UVM's plan was to first build the Tarrant Event Center and then work on renovations and improvements to Gutterson. Because COVID temporarily delayed the construction and renovation work, what is the new timing for the completion of the Gutterson renovations? And I'm asking that because Gutterson's seating capacity is increasing by 2,000 seats. And so I want to know, when is that coming online? Second question is, would UVM please confirm for the benefit of the planning commissioners that except for UVM's annual graduation ceremony, the largest event ever held on the athletic campus was 44,500 people who attended Obama's speaking event in 2012. But after when the new facility is ready to be used, UVM plans on hosting as many 5,000, 6,300, and 7,300 person events on the athletic center. So I just want to have UVM talk about that to show how the event size will be increasing from what we've seen in the past. Third question is, the Virtue Field Phase 3 project is listed in the Joint Institutional Parking Management Plan. The description only mentions a ticket booth, concession stand, and similar support services, but does not mention any additional seating. So I'd like to know, please, will Virtue Field Phase 3 include any additional seating? And then my last question, and after this last question, I'm pretty much done. UVM's Joint Institutional Parking Management Plan includes a list of possible projects. A garage is listed as tentative, but not definite. If UVM builds a garage, where will it most likely be located? Approximately, what will its parking capacity be? And what would be the timing for the garage? Given UVM's currently tight parking supply and UVM plans for events at the PFG building, why is the construction of a garage tentative? What is UVM's alternative parking plan if it doesn't build a garage? That's it. Thank you very much for everybody for your hard work.
Thank you, Barbara. Megan, do we have anybody else?
We have one more. Lonnie Raven joined. Lonnie, do you want to speak, or are you just here to answer questions, if there are any?
I was not planning on speaking unless there was something for me to speak about.
Okay.
If the planning commissioners have questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Are we set then for the public forum?
That's all I see, Andy.
Okay.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Then we'll move on to item 5, which is our joint institutional parking management plan for 2020 to 2025. So this is the second time we have this on our agenda and folks are here to speak to us about it. Thanks for coming back again. Appreciate it. And before we get started, Megan, could you just remind us what our role is, the Planning Commission's role in this is again?
Yeah, so the role of the Planning Commission is to, hear the presentation, hear the summary of the report from CATMA, ask them any questions, provide them with feedback on the JIP, and ultimately, we've provided a draft memo from the Planning Commission to the DRB. You can provide a recommendation to the DRB as they consider whether or not to approve this 5-year plan to be used in the development review process for the institutions in the future.
Okay, great, thanks. Emily?
Is that draft memo what was in the packet last time? That's the cover page?
It is. It's in this week's agenda packet on page 77 as well. We didn't make any changes to it.
Okay, I'm looking at it from last week, so.
Okay.
So there were no changes made from last week, okay.
Okay. All right, so at our last meeting, last time this came up, there were a number of questions and comments that were made. And I know the folks from who are working on the plan, we're going to come back with some follow-up. And then I think commissioners have follow-up questions as well or comments. Who wants to kick this off? Should we?
So Kim or Sandy, if one of you want to share your screen, you should have the ability to do so. And I think that CATMA is going to kick us off on providing information to you to help answer questions that you shared last time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Kim, I'm just going to ask you if you can share the screen. So good evening, everyone. Yes, in follow-up to our presentation of the JIP on October 13th, there were some questions at that meeting, and then we had a nice virtual meeting with Emily to answer some questions and clarifications she had. It was a good discussion. Appreciate
Thank you
your
so
time.
much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your packet tonight, CATMA provided a memo dated November 5th outlining the clarifications that you requested and our answers. And so I'm planning to display these clarifications really just as a guidance for the discussion. It's basically what is in the November 5th memo, but I think displaying them will just help us guide the discussion. And I just want to reiterate again, that this report has really undergone a huge overhaul over the past year and a half and really working to improve the document. And I really appreciate all the hard work that Kim, our analyst, has put into this report. The expertise and research from the TRC. John Dowds from the TRC is on the phone and his time is kind of limited this evening. So I should probably jump right into this. So if there's any methodology type questions that John can or Kim can answer. And I really appreciate all the city staff, the planning commission, institutional input. I think we've made a lot of progress on this. So I'm displaying clarification 1A that is in the memo. This was in regards to the demand formulas for the student groups. I guess, does anyone have any questions related to what was provided in the memo on this clarification 1A?
Thanks. Any questions, anyone? I can't see everybody right now because I'm mostly see the chart. So if anyone wants to speak, just chime in.
If anybody wants to actually also be able to see the commissioners while you also see the slides, you can put your mouse anywhere in the Zoom window and then hit escape, and it should make it to where you can see the videos at the same time. That might help you, Andy, if you want to see the commissioners.
And hit escape. Well, I don't hear anyone. So why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so any questions on that? No questions on that. Okay, clarification 1B was on the auto mode share for the UVM student groups. And there was a question, I think Emily had questioned about a 43%, which was in the original initial March 2019 plan. So here on this page and in our memo is the comparison of the May 2019 data and October 2020 students within a half mile and outside a half mile and their auto mode share, just to clarify that. And there's, as I said, there's more description in the memo. And this was brought up a couple of times. So in an effort to clarify the accounting of the Redstone Lofts and Commons apartments, you know, we had a good discussion with Emily on how to include these. So what we have is provided two options, and I look to the Planning Commission on what makes, you know, what your preference is on how to include the Redstone Loft students and the parking supply. So as was in the memo, we'll show the two options. Kim, do you want to just quickly walk through this for them?
Sure. So this first option is, I think, makes most sense, and so does John with the TRC in terms of clearly defining each user group and their different travel behaviors. So in this option 1, we make Redstone Lofts and Apartments their own user group. Though they are like upperclassmen who are technically off-campus students, but we consider them on-campus students in terms of their travel behavior. So they don't really fit either of those categories. So here you can see their percent of users and their peak parking demand is from all of those who own a vehicle. It's used just like the on-campus students, obviously, because they have their own parking lots and are not restricted by the same rules that on-campus students have at UVM. Their auto ownership is much higher. So that's why breaking it up kind of helps. Whereas in the next option, you'll see that it's just trying to average two very different numbers. And then we also have to include Redstone Lofts and Apartments, or Commons, sorry, parking supply into the full supply, but we wanted to separate it from the UVM supply. And basically, you'll see two surplus options, or like two surplus options is what I'll call them. Net spaces, actually. So you can follow along with my thoughts. But so the first, the smaller one that says with only UVM supply, that's basically saying that like barely the UVM parking can also accommodate those students at Redstone Lofts and Commons, but we then include their 362 spaces to show that, because those students for the most part are parking in their Redstone Lofts parking spots. So that's why you have the two net spaces of 6 and also 368.
And Kim, can I jump in here for just a moment?
Yes, go for it.
I think one thing that people will probably notice looking at this is that the demand for the Redstone Lofts and Apartments, as determined by the survey, is a bit higher than the parking supply supplied by Redstone. And so Kim went back and was looking at the data there, and approximately 9% of the vehicle owners in our survey sample at Redstone Lofts and Apartments report parking somewhere other than at the Lofts and Apartments. So just as sort of a data quality check, it was very encouraging for me to see that we were capturing people who were not parking there, and that they were reporting that they were not parking there. So that when you look at just the people who report parking there, it is within the parking lot size. So that's you know, a good indication that we're getting pretty good data quality, and that we don't have, to borrow the polling term of the week, we don't have shy off-street parkers in our sample. People were willing to say, I'm not parking at Redstone, I'm parking downtown, or I'm parking on UVM or whatever. So just one note there that you might notice that I think actually reflects really well on the quality of the survey data.
Great. John, how are you doing on time?
I'm gonna have to head out in the next like 5 minutes or so to get my 2-year-old down.
And John, you have seen the presentation tonight before you leave. Is there anything that you would like to add?
Yeah,
or
just
say?
just echoing what Kim said, that option 1 method of really breaking that out into 3 distinct groups, I think provides the greatest clarity and also has the greatest methodological rigor behind it. So after having talked this back and forth with Kim a few times after our conversation with Emily, and realizing that we needed to break this out more clearly. I think this provides the clearest and most accurate picture of what's happening across those user groups.
Any questions for John?
Anyone have any questions? I think we're
Okay.
set. Thank you, John.
Okay, and
Thanks.
I'll be available by email if people come up with things later on that they have questions about. And I'm going to go put my kid to bed.
Thanks,
everyone,
John.
for your time.
Thank you. Great. So this would be option 1, and then we'll move to option 2.
And then just to tell you the differences, so this doesn't break out the redstone lofts and apartments as their own demand. So that's why you see this 13.4%. It's that basically the average of that 64 and that 11 due to the number of people, like respondents of the survey. The difference from this and what is in the version of the document you saw last time we presented is we moved the students from the off-campus, the redstone lofts and apartments, so 605 students from the off-campus students to the on-campus students, so that the full number of students who we surveyed, they relate to their proper groups. So that's just some clarification. And then we added the redstone parking supply in there, and same thing with the two net spaces, one including redstone and one off.
Thanks, Kim. There is the clarification 3 as provided at the memo as well. As we had shared with you, the 2019 survey was the first time we surveyed or began to collect data about on-street parking behavior and where folks are parking. We see that there's an improvement we can make on this question in collecting data, but just clarifying here the institutions and the number of on-street parking. And we plan to improve that survey question in the spring to get more information on what streets students or user groups are parking on. And next. This is just was a question on clarifying the group categories, previous JIT versions and current JIT version. And then there was a question about including the medical center offsite parking supply. So we have included that, updated that in this chart here.
And then something we're trying to look to all of you to answer with this chart is if you would like this to replace the current chart that is in the document, would you like both of them to be included or have this included in the supplement, and whatever makes the most sense? Just let us know.
Any comments from the commission on that question? Anyone?
I would say more is better. So if there's 2 charts to include it, the report's already really long. Why not throw in another page, I suppose?
Seems to make sense. Thanks, Emily.
And then I think that was it. The last clarification that's in the memo, we had talked about improving the utilization map with a breakdown of who parks where. And I think this is something we should be able to include in our spring update. And I just want to mention too, there's no upcoming institutional projects planned other than what is in process and has already been permitted. All the projects for each institution are listed in their respective chapters. And in the spring, we'll have a better idea of the status of the projects that are listed and their movement with the impact of COVID. And I
want
think
to go back for just 1 second on the where you gave us the 2 options about Redstone campus, the Redstone housing. I think you were asking us to weigh in on which of the 2 options were preferable. And I don't think we got to that. It sounds like your recommendation was option 1 that had more information in it.
Yeah. That's correct.
Harris, you saying yes or question?
That was
Oh.
a one for option one.
Okay. Anyone disagree using option one that has more information in it? Okay. Okay, good. Didn't mean to cut you off if you were continuing.
No, no
I just
problem.
wanted to make sure we got to that question that you raised for us.
Thank you. And I think in the spring, in our spring update, you know, that can also, we'll be also revamping that annual update than what's been done in the past, and may address some of the questions and comments and feedback that we received tonight. And I think in the spring, we'll know more as everyone is aware what telework looks like, what learning remotely looks like, what telehealth looks like, what the projects look like. So I think in this, our spring update, we'll have better direction, clarification on where we're headed.
Okay, thank you. So questions, comments from the commission? Harris?
Yeah, along those lines that you were just mentioning, the projections on student growth, I'm wondering if that should be looked at as well in the spring update to see if, I can't remember the number that was in the report, but if that's being revised too because of COVID.
Yes, all those numbers will have updated, be available from the institutions.
Anyone else?
It seems to me that this is an extraordinarily, complicated document that I understand what it's addressing, but the real issue, what it doesn't address is the demand for parking on the street, and that's something that we don't have in our purview. And I'm wondering if anybody, Andy, if anybody else has any suggestions on how to sort of make that all work together, that we can address something that I'm not exactly sure what to do with this plan, and how to address the continued issue of demand for people who drive a car alone and park on the street close to the university or even the hospital.
I can add to that. I think I would have loved, one thing I would have liked to have seen in the report is more data on questions asked from people who are not using the university's parking supply as to where they park, so that we could see how that the parking demand for UVM does have impact on specific neighborhoods, and what tactics we could deploy to change that dynamic.
Yeah, we attempted to collect that, as I mentioned last year. And as I said at our last planning commission meeting, if there is a question that would be helpful for the city to collect regarding on-street parking, that we'd be happy to collaborate on that, to collect the data that we need.
I would also like to say there may need to be some other data collection method for that particular question than just the survey, because as a person who's seen all of the responses maybe too many times, a lot of people are hesitant to answer their actual street name that they prefer to park on because of this exact reason. So we might have to be a bit more creative in asking people where they park.
Well, it's probably pretty easy to figure out where they park too. I mean, it's pretty much the streets around UVM that don't have resident-only parking, and the parking's free, so.
Yeah, I think when we were working with DPW, I guess maybe last fall, to try to address this question about where people who are parking off campus on a street might be parking. We had been trying to get some capacity together to be able to do some street counts during the same windows of time that the institutions were counting their parking lot utilization.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been working with DPW to try to put together a map of all of the parking regulations within a quarter mile of the campus, just so that better informs us on where we might have streets that are kind of open and unregulated. And one of the observations that they shared with me is that some of these streets are already filled up already because people live on those streets. You know, there are certain blocks that we know of that are full all of the time because of that. And so part of our discussion was trying to focus on streets that have a high rate of turnover and aren't regulated, and trying to figure out, you know, how often, how frequently are they utilized, by whom, and maybe kind of zero in on some of those streets as potential opportunities for us to look at strategies for.
Jennifer?
So I had a couple of questions. One was just in terms of the peak demand, how you figured that out. So I thought Barbara's comments about big events, and particularly with new facilities with a lot more capacity coming to campus, is that factored in? Or are you really looking at daytime peaks?
So we asked all of our survey respondents what times they are on campus. So that is how we figure out what the peak time is, the most people answering that. I was thinking about this earlier today in terms of events, and my thought is that some, if not most, of the people coming to those events are not students or employees, so we don't capture their pattern. So that would have to be something we would get from the UVM.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a big deal, especially with the really large increase in capacity for those facilities, which I think, you know, there's obviously pros and cons to that, but the parking, understanding what's happening. And it sounds like, I actually don't know how many events they typically have outside of the athletic events, but it sounds like they're looking at, if they're smart, community events to take advantage of that venue. So I think that's a significant thing that we need to be looking at, because it could really have, if they're not accommodating that parking, then, you know, that needs to be addressed. I think the other thing that I'm kind of struggling with in terms of how this fits in terms of recommendations on how we look at the parking demand at UVM is, are we, you know, is UVM really just looking at increasing parking spaces? And I know CATMA's main mission is to really look at how you reduce the demand for parking. And I feel like that's getting a little bit lost in the focus on parking. And so from my perspective, I don't know that it's a big win that there's a ton of new parking. What we would really want to see is a big win in the reduction in the need for parking, because people are taking other modes, or there's other strategies for that. So I just want to weigh in on that perspective. I would not be super excited if the message from the Planning Commission is just build a whole bunch of new parking without really focusing on the strategies that you are already implementing, and would like to, you know, probably have a way more uptake in terms of getting people to drive less to campus.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
So in regards to events have never been included in the Joint Institution Parking Management Plan. I mean, that at the initial 5-year plan, which was 2009 to 2014, it just has never been part of the JIP itself. And part of the reason was that many of the events are held during, you know, off-peak or weekend hours. So with that enables UVM to park, you know, attendees in off-site lots, various lots, using the CAT shuttle system to bring people to the facility. So there's been a lot of discussion about events. And as far as the facility itself, you know, that's already received permitting and Act 250 with, you know, having to accommodate the parking. So I just wanted to comment on the events not being included in the JIP. And then in regards to, you know, more collective or more TDM strategies, as you're talking about, Jennifer, and certainly we don't want to be building more parking. We want to get people to use more sustainable travel modes. So I think like how finding that balance.
Andy, I think Lonnie Raven from UVM had her hand up in response to a question about the institutions. Are you okay with her
Yes.
answering? Okay. Go ahead, Lonnie.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to clarify a few things. The on-campus multi-purpose center was permitted, between 2017 and 2019. And it went through, obviously, the municipal zoning process as well as Act 250. And it was pretty extensively investigated at that point. I am not capable of answering all the questions about how many seats and how many events and that kind of thing at this point, because I'm not the director. But at the time when it was permitted, the director of transportation and parking, the director of athletics, they had extensive information. So they gave extensive information. Those permits and all the information is online, so anyone can look at that and get a lot of information that I'm not capable of giving you right now. The Joint Institutional Parking and Management Plan uses the results of those permits. So right now, right here, I don't think it's appropriate to reopen the question of those permits, but I would encourage you to look at the discussion that's already been done. That's one thing. The other thing is I did do the permitting, and I can tell you that definitely UVM's goal is TDM and demand reduction rather than accommodating everybody who feels like taking a car to campus. So in general, all over the world, that does involve making parking less than easy all the time for everyone, because that's what TDM is. You have to offer people a better alternative. So that is UVM's goal. And the third thing that I want to say is that, pre-COVID and before times, when we did have events where people kind of squished together during the day and evening, event services, which is the UVM arm that deals with events, with outside events, non-UVM events, we did limit events due to parking. So it's not a thing where UVM would have an event for 2,000 people, even though there's no parking for them. So it's a fine sort of like a game of give and take. If you want to have an event, you have to make sure there's parking. If there's no parking, then that limits the events. And that's what UVM does. UVM plays with those numbers all the time. Now that we're in the after times, I have no idea. I don't think anybody has an idea of how it's really going to work out in the future. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be different than the past. I hope that's clarified a little bit. I'm happy to answer any other questions if you have any.
Thanks, Lonnie. Any questions for her or any other comments, questions? You're on mute, Bruce. I think we're not hearing you. Bruce, it looks like you're trying to talk, but I'm not hearing you at least. Could anyone else hear Bruce? And it doesn't look like you're on mute, so I'm not sure what it is.
Bruce, maybe if you have the ability to call in, I don't know if you're using a computer, maybe you could call in on a phone to get your audio.
Just write it on paper.
Oh, there we go. We can hear you now.
Yeah, I unplugged my jack. Maybe that was doing it. I just want to comment on the on-site events at UVM. So I go to every UVM basketball game, and I've been at games when there were state championships going on and also hockey games at the same time. And I've never had to park in the neighborhoods, not once, in 12 years of going there. And mostly I think it's because of their shuttle system and because it's a non-peak time. So anyway, I just want to throw that in.
Thanks. Emily, did you have something?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering about the memo that's going with this. I'd love to include something in the memo. If the memo is coming from the Planning Commission, or is it coming from staff?
I think it's
Memo
coming
is
from
coming. Sorry.
us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd
so
love to include, if it's coming from the Planning Commission and it's a direction to the City Council, I'd love to include something in the memo about how we'd really like to see some cooperation between DPW. And it sounds like, Megan, you're working on this. And so I don't mean to discount the work that you're doing, but I think some emphasis to the fact that we'd like to see some cooperation between DPW and management of the parking supply within neighborhoods to assist in UVM's goal of reducing transportation in vehicles to UVM. Because as long as UVM has a demand and the city has a supply of free parking, we're never going to reduce the number of people who are using cars to come to UVM, because we are supplying free parking in neighborhoods around UVM. And it's actually more convenient than paying for parking on campus or parking in one of the satellite spots. So until we have coordination between the institutional parking management plan and DPW and the City Council to have the political will to have this conversation about parking in neighborhoods, we're never really going to solve this problem that is actually really essential in the city meeting its goals, because we talk about one of our big goals is reducing our carbon impact, and one of our biggest carbon impacts is transportation, and that is people driving to UVM. So here we are, this is the issue, and we need to deal with it. So I'd like to include something in the memo asking the council to take on that issue, because I think it's essential to what we're talking about. Because really with events, talking about events, we're talking about people parking in neighborhoods. If the neighborhood parking is regulated, either it's residential only or it's meters or some sort of regulation, it's a non-issue. You can't park in the neighborhoods, or you're gonna pay to park in the neighborhoods, and that's gonna drive the demand. So that would be my request.
So this is a good segue to the report and this is a report actually that the commission would be giving to the DRB. It's not going directly to the council, but if you wanted to go to council, we could always copy the council on it.
Sure.
Which it sounds like, Emily, from your comments, it seems like that might be a good idea to do
I
that.
think it needs to go to everybody. Like, I think maybe it needs to go to whoever's getting this we need to be talking about this outside of a silo, because we're talking about it within the silo of the UVM parking management plan. We're trying to solve this big problem, but we're not coordinating between departments and institutions right now to solve this problem. So let's put that right front and center in the memo, that we're never going to solve this problem until we can coordinate off-street parking in the neighborhoods with UVM and have a cohesive parking strategy for all of the city.
Okay. Thanks. Any other comments on the memo that it's in our packet? Megan had done a draft of it for us to review, and just got Emily's comments that I think are good ones to incorporate into there. Any other comments, Alex?
I agree wholeheartedly with Emily, and maybe you should send a copy to the DPW commission as well. You know, we're not talking
Makes
to
sense.
everybody.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
that was actually a question or a suggestion I was going to offer, since the DPW commission is ultimately the one that has the authority over regulating street parking. I think that they are the most appropriate, audience for your comments on, coordinating more closely about neighborhoods around the institutions.
Good. Any other questions, comments on the memo? Jennifer?
I also agree. And I think I feel like we had a joint meeting or one of the DPW folks came to one of our meetings one time. So I completely agree about sharing it with a number of folks, but also maybe it's a good time to bring us back together to really talk about this, because you know, it's great to send it to them, but I think if we really want to see some action, we've got to actually start coordinating with them. If there's a way to do that, I would suggest that we bring their chair in or have a joint meeting. We've done that before with DRB. So I think that would be a good next step potentially.
Yeah, we have met with the Public Works Commission or members of it. I think that's a great idea to do it again, to reconnect with them.
Yeah, and you know, I mentioned it earlier, but I think that a good subject maybe for that conversation would be to explore, you know, a map of parking regulations in this area. I mentioned I've been trying to work with DPW to take, you know, the map of all of our RPP zones and map of all of our meter zones and everything in between that, and try to get a better sense of what the landscape of parking regulation is in the areas immediately adjacent to the institutions. And I think that that could really inform our discussion in terms of, you know, what the scope of our, you know, concern is, or the scope of what the strategies might be. You know, what streets might be of higher priority for us to regulate, you know, or consider to be used in a different way, those types of things. I think that could be a good, you know, piece of information for us to have a conversation around.
Good. Any other comments about the memo? Megan, do you have a good sense of direction of revisions to the memo?
I think so, in terms of, you know, adding some, you know, upfront in the memo, you know, about the interest and encouragement for different commissions and departments of the city to collaborate on looking at street parking. I'm not sure if there were any other suggestions. The couple of things that we did put in here in terms of recommendations that people have spoken about are actually come out of our earlier discussions from back in the spring. I think that the commission had been interested in having a recommendation in here that, you know, if there are any new projects that come up in this next 5 years that aren't planned for as part of the JIP, that will have an impact on the number of beds or the potential to change in any way the parking demand, that those projects need to be considered independent of the JIP, that this can't be used for those projects, which is practice, but I think it's good to have that included here. And then it also just recognizes some of the things that Sandy has mentioned about, you know, ongoing monitoring and considering the future impacts of the current, you know, COVID status that the institutions are experiencing. So it's my understanding, and this is acknowledged in the memo, that the institutions are still doing lot counts in the, you know, kind of structure that CATMA has been helping them set up. We will expect to see some potentially major changes in, you know, parking utilization or demand in this period of time, and it'll be helpful to see what that impact has been. But one thing that I did include in this memo is to acknowledge that that's just one data point, and that, you know, it'll really be a matter of looking at the annual updates every year for the next 5 years to try to get a sense of, you know, how quickly things either rebound or how permanent some of those changes might be, to help us realign some of our expectations about impacts to demand. So some of those things that are bigger question marks that you all have asked about that are reflected there.
Okay, good. Be good to have a motion to authorize the memo.
Andy?
As we've talked about the revisions to it. Yes?
Just a quick question. It wasn't clear to me what the commission's desire was relative to the question about event parking.
I can,
Emily?
I'm personally not too concerned about event parking because I don't know how they could track. They'd have to survey people going to the events. And I do think that most of the events happen off hours from peak demand. So they're happening in the evening. And so it's when the rest of the parking supply isn't being used as much. And again, I think that the problem of people parking in neighborhoods actually won't be solved by creating more parking. And if we required UVM, let's say we said, okay, well, the solution to the event parking is that you need 500 new spaces. We're requiring UVM to build 500 spaces that are going to be used for one-time events, 5 events a year, or even if it's 20 events a year. I think if you looked at a map of UVM, so much of the earth is being used for parking. We don't need to create more parking. We actually need to reduce demand for parking. And I don't think creating more parking for events is going to do that. I think that closing up some of the loopholes we have in the neighborhoods is actually going to solve that problem.
Any other comments on that one? Well said, Emily.
And I totally agree. I just, because it had come up, I hadn't heard what the closure was. I think, it wouldn't be hard to get some utilization data once they start holding events again. But agree with all of those points.
And I can actually, I can also include something in, make a more strongly worded statement that the Planning Commission's preference is to see, a stronger emphasis on strategies that actually reduce parking demand rather than lead to the creation of more parking. I can make sure that's emphasized more here.
Great.
Alex, did you have something?
Kim, Sandy, for what it's worth, you might to consider asking UVM for a breakdown of who their season ticket holders are for basketball and hockey. I don't know if that would tell you a whole lot, but that's a
Bruce.
start. Types of people who go to those games, whether they already hold parking.
People like Bruce.
Yeah, we certainly could, attempt to collect some of that data, but again, events have not been a part of the JIP.
Yeah, I just trying to think how to word this, that, in addition to having in our memo that when there are new projects, it doesn't fall into the gym. I think it's also important to have, the projections when those change because of COVID. But I think some of these changes might be, not permanent necessarily, but things are going to change for students and staff levels. I'd hate to get to the place where, more parking is recommended to be built without, looking at how that demand really is going to change in the future as well.
Alex?
I would note that some projects that I was not previously aware of are mentioned or referenced in this plan, like Coolidge Hall on Redstone campus or on Trinity campus, like the back 5 and cottages. It looks like UVM is planning to take those buildings down, and I don't see necessarily there's a plan to replace them, but it's just interesting to learn about these things through a parking management plan. So
I missed what was going on with Coolidge. I didn't notice that.
It looks like, that they talk about the facility's number of square feet and associated parking, and it seems to suggest that in the future, that building won't exist.
Oh. Well, my daughter was in that dorm a year ago. I will tell you, it's not a very nice dorm.
Could I ask a follow-up question to what Harris had shared? Just because I want to make sure that I'm capturing everything correctly. So were you meaning that, like when CATMA provides us with annual updates, if there are significant changes one way or the other on the projections for future parking demand, that they should, respond with any changes to strategies?
Yes,
Okay.
Not just because of parking demand due to new projects, but parking demand due to new projections of student and staff levels.
Okay, yeah, like changes in travel behaviors or other significant shifts and factors that will impact the demand.
Right, travel behaviors and just number of people.
Yep.
If there'll be less people.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, with all these, yes, someone just saying,
I just wanted to let you know, I don't know if you can see that there are a couple of people that have their hand raised. It's up to you if you want to entertain any more comments or questions, but I wanted to make sure you saw that.
from the public?
Yes.
Sure. I didn't see that, so.
Okay. So Lonnie,
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to address the question that came up about the 5-year new projects question. It's like a little bit of a dance, just so you know, because you can say, well, I didn't know UVM was going to do this project. And the truth is, UVM will not necessarily do that project. But as you just said, if it's not on the list, then we can't take any parking impact into account. And then it's much more complicated to have the project. So it's sort of like a dance. Do we include a project that's really only in the imagination status, or how well thought out does a project have to be, and do we actually have funding for it? So if you see a project on that list, that doesn't necessarily mean that UVM really has it planned out to an extent that there's funding and everything. So it's just that we do consider it when we're considering potential possible parking impacts. So I hope that clarifies a little bit about how we decide to include projects or not.
Megan, was there anybody else? You're on mute, by the way.
thank you. There is one more. Barbara Hedrick also had her hand up.
Hi there. Just a few quick thoughts. I really liked Emily's comment about closing loopholes so that where there are streets that are not residential permit parking, those are loopholes. And if we can close those so that on-street parking becomes actually tighter and less accessible to UVM visitors, that would be very helpful for reducing SOV patterns. And also CEDO Article 8 says it wants to reduce SOV and reduce traffic related to the universities on streets next to the university. So I think if that letter that you're talking about, and I think it's great you're going to send it to multiple commissions, I'd like them to not read it and get the impression that we want to open up streets. That would be the opposite of what we're thinking, I believe. Also, Sharon Busher had suggested suggesting, I don't know if it's going to be in the letter or to the DRB, that this plan not create a 5-year parking waiver for UVM. Maybe would the Planning Commission be open to suggesting to the DRB that we just use this for 1 year and see how well UVM deals with its parking on a year-by-year basis? Those are my comments. Thank you. Oh, one last thing. When the PFG project went in front of the DRB in 2018, it was not disclosed that the seating capacity would be increasing by 2,000 seats. So the event parking is relevant, even though the permit for PFG was issued.
Thanks. Any follow-up on this?
I just wanted to offer one follow-up about the question of the recommendation on the length of approval for the plan. I think, you know, it's in the purview of the Planning Commission what you would like to do with that recommendation. Ultimately, the purpose of this plan is to seek the parking waiver from the DRB. So, you know, that's why we are discussing this. When the Planning Commission was reviewing an earlier draft of this plan back in, you know, the spring pre-COVID, I was saying earlier today that it feels like a totally different world. You had been kind of coming together around the recommendation of only approving it for 1 year, but I think that the reason for that was because we had some concerns about the survey data that was being used to prepare the plan, and just some of the questions that we had about other pieces of information that would really inform the methodology and inform the planning process. As when staff was reviewing this, we felt like a lot of those pieces were filled in and felt comfortable making the recommendation to you all to recommend it for 5 years to the DRB.
With annual updates.
Right, sorry, that was the other thing I was going to say. Thank you, Sandy. There are annual updates that are reported to the city. So that also provides us with a sort of check and balance to see if things are not, you know, performing significantly in line with what was projected in the plan. And Andy, you do have one more hand up if you'd like to entertain one more comment from Sharon Busher.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, Sharon, you should be able to talk.
Hi, this is Sharon Busher again. I just wanted to make one comment, and I appreciate the fact that events have never been part of the plan, and that the predictability might be challenging. But now it appears, based on the comments from UVM, that there has been a broadening of the number of events that could occur with this new structure. And I feel that just because it hasn't been part of the plan is no reason not to consider it becoming part of a plan. And I don't want it to get lost that my point for the city and for UVM and for the people that attend events, my point was my little attendee as going to the Lane series, when there are simultaneous events going on, some large and some small, where that precludes available parking, I think there needs to be in this plan the acknowledgement that that's a problem and it should be addressed. Because if it isn't addressed, then people park on the street. Or park illegally, as I said, and make it incredibly unsafe for everybody, pedestrian and vehicle. So I really feel that this is a problem that might not have been addressed in the past, but really should be entertained in the future. The other point that I wanted to make is that I am so pleased that Emily made this comment about silos and not looking at it in isolation. I truly believe that UVM and the city need to partner better, because when we had parking removed on Colchester Avenue, I went to UVM and asked if they could help provide some parking for the very people that signed leases and thought they had on-street parking, that then lost it like 6 weeks after they moved in. And UVM did not entertain that at all. Yet those very residents were mainly UVM students. I think when we have a problem, we collectively need to try to solve it. And we can't just point fingers at each other, because we're in this together. So I just really wanted to bring that home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Andy, that's all I see.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Any other comments, questions, additions, changes to our memo beyond what we've talked about? If not, a motion to authorize it would be good, as with the amendments that we've talked about. Anyone want to do a motion? Motion by Eves, seconded by Alex. Any more discussion on that?
I think that with the annual updates, I'm okay with authorizing it for 5 years. Does anybody else disagree?
I'd agree with that.
Okay, we have the motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and Bruce, I don't see you, but it sounds like you said yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, that passes. Well, thank you very much for coming again. We look forward to updates periodically. And
Thank
good luck with it.
you. Thank you for all your great input. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandy and Kim, for helping me and spending that special time with me to go over everything. I really appreciated it.
Anytime. Have a good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
We're on to item 6, which is commissioner items. Any commissioner items? We have our next meeting is, do we have a date set for that yet, Megan?
No, I wanted to ask you a few questions about that. We've been trying to schedule your next meeting as a joint meeting with the council's ordinance committee to talk about short-term rentals. And our counselors sit on a lot of different committees, so it's been a little bit difficult to find a date. So I have 2 options for us. The first is for us to move forward with our normal November 24th meeting. I know, Andy, though, you weren't able to make that, and one of the council ordinance committee members couldn't make that, but they were okay to miss it. The other option, if it works for the Planning Commission, would be for us to move our meeting to December 1st, which I think is a Tuesday. It'd be the following week if the commission is open to doing that and is available to do that.
I could do December 1st. How about other people?
I can do it.
Anyone who can't do it?
Somebody who can't?
Okay, it looks like for Planning Commission, that would be a good day.
Okay. So we'll plan to do that, and I will send out a confirmation to all of you and to the council ordinance committee members as well.
Great. Thank you.
Does that
Any
mean
other commissioner items?
Does that mean we're going to have another meeting on the following week?
So we might, it depends on where we go with that meeting. We might try to move it a little bit later in December. You only have one scheduled meeting in December. We might see if we could move that a little bit later. If you feel comfortable getting to the point of warning a public hearing at the end of that meeting, we might see if we could schedule it for a later time in December. But we'll see how that conversation goes with you at the December 1 meeting.
Okay. All right, then we're on to item 7, which are minutes and communications. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes and accept communications?
So moved.
Motion by Emily, seconded by Jennifer. All those in favor of the motion, say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Great. Any opposed? That passes. Then next final is adjournment. Motion to adjourn by Harris, seconded by Eves. All those in favor of adjournment,
Aye.
say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Great. Well, thank you.